Hello and welcome to Indian Standard Time. I'm Siddharth Varadarajan, and the subject for our show today is Japan. Japanese foreign policy, recent changes in Japan's security policy, and of course, the current state of Japan-India relations. Joining me to discuss these topics is a very special guest, former diplomat from Japan, Yukio Okamoto.
Yes.
A former advisor to Premier Shinzo Abe, but also earlier you have advised Ryotaro Hashimoto, as well as Prime Minister Koizumi, a veteran Japanese diplomat and an expert on Japanese affairs. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Varadarajan.
Let's start by looking at the current state of India-Japan relations. In the past, it seems that for both Japan and India, the economic dimension was the most important aspect of the relationship. India has looked to Japan for investment, for technology. The Japanese have looked to India for a market for their goods as a destination for their investments. But with the change of government in the last year and a half, 2 years in both Japan and India, the coming of Prime Minister Narendra Modi in India and Shinzo Abe in Japan, it seems as if the security dimension has become more important or has acquired greater salience. Would this be a correct reading from the Japanese perspective?
Oh, I think so. Prime Minister Abe has been quite proactive compared to his predecessors to first bolster the defense of Japan and surrounding area, to extend peace and stability, and also to serve for the international community. We were bound by very strict interpretation of the Constitution thus far. We are not changing the Constitution this time.
Yeah.
But the interpretation has been changed to allow Japan for a wider role.
Right. Ambassador, I'll come to that a little bit later.
Okay.
But if we were to look at Japan-India to begin with, what is it that Japan expects the role India to play in the Asia-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific region? Why is India now a more attractive partner from a security perspective for Japan?
Well, from our point of view, Asia is becoming a more unstable area.
Okay.
And that requires a strong India to be here as an anchor of stability. India is, of course, the greatest and largest democracy in the world, certainly so in Asia, along with Japan. And our cooperation will yield a lot of effective results to extend peace and stability.
You mentioned growing instability in Asia. Can you give us examples of what you or what the Japanese side considers instability? Are you talking about the situation in South China Sea or East China Seas, or are there other things that you have in mind?
Well, of course, what I have in my mind is quite an expansionary policy taken by China,
Okay.
Especially in South China Sea and also East China Sea, involving Japan. And also Russian aggressive march towards the Far East. And well, of course, in the Middle East, we have even more unstable situation. So all combined together, I think we need to establish a very robust and resilient partnership between Japan and India. That's our conclusion.
The rise of China is something that concerns the Japanese quite a lot?
Well, we welcome China into growing into a mature and big economic and political state. But you know, we have our own unique issue of history with China. Well, China has not forgiven Japan even 70 years after the war. We have repeated our apology, but that fundamental dislocation of historical perception is serving as the source of instability. We have not yet come to rapprochement.
But you feel, is there a territorial, is the Japanese fear that China is looking to expand territorially, is looking to take areas that do not belong to it?
That's one thing. Yeah. They have claimed Senkaku Islands, which China call Diaoyu, in East China Sea,
yes.
Which has been held by Japan in a very peaceful manner for 70 years without any protest from China. But once there was a UN report in 1968 saying that there may be a reserve of oil in that area, suddenly they started to say, oh, hey, that's ours. But it's not about these islands only. The overall expansion of Chinese maritime strategy into the Pacific is causing Japan a lot of concern.
I know that India and Japan have targeted maritime cooperation as an important aspect of what they want to do. Recently, we had the Malabar naval exercises, which saw the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Forces and the Indian Navy, as well as the US and Australia, come together. Is there a danger, Okamoto-san, of this kind of grouping, the four-power or quartet, whatever you want to call it, hastening the arrival of a Cold War, a new Cold War in Asia, a division between, say, the so-called democratic powers on the one side and China on the other, and perhaps China, which sees a greater attractiveness in coming closer together with Russia, particularly in the Asian region. Is there a danger of this kind of new Cold War?
Well, I think that's an excellent observation, Mr. Varadarajan. Japan, India, United States, Australia should never be seen as China as coalescing or ganging together to encircle China.
Which is the Chinese allegation. They always say this is you're trying to contain China. This is the accusation that Beijing makes.
Well, in 1960, Japan concluded a security treaty with the United States. And the main purpose of this security treaty is to secure peace and stability in the Far East. So we have been doing this for half a century, or for 60 years, that Japan and the United States should cooperate to extend stability in this region, in the Far East, I mean. And now United States was doing the same cooperation with India. And now that the threats at sea is far more complicated than several years ago, with Chinese expansionary policy, with the terrorists in Afghanistan using Indian Ocean as the route to traffic drug and weapons. And we have pirates at the Sea of Arabia. And we need to preserve the safe passage, safe freedom of navigation. It's never to contain China militarily.
Right.
It's just to protect the freedom of sea, especially for merchant fleet. And of course, United States, India, and Japan have the largest naval capability besides China. And so I think it's a natural course of evolution.
From the Chinese point of view, given that they are excessively dependent on energy shipments through the waters of the Indian Ocean, or the Asia Pacific, shall we say, I suppose there is a sense in which they may look at naval cooperation between Japan, India, and the US as something which may be targeted against them. Do you envisage in the future, say, trilateral naval exercises involving the Japan MSDF, the PLA Navy of China, and the Indian Navy? Could this be something that might serve as an icebreaker and perhaps reassure the Chinese that what we are looking at is common security for everybody rather than targeting any one power?
I very much hope so. I mean, certainly that can be done in Indian Ocean. And I think it is a wonderful idea that Japan India, China, and the United States will jointly secure the passage of freedom in the Indian Ocean. But South China Sea, they have to change their policy first.
Right.
They are claiming that all the islands, few hundreds of them, within the so-called 9 dots line are all their territories, and that they are denying the passage of a merchant fleet through these waters, I mean, to the territorial waters that they claim. And we
they have the air defense, the ADIZ now, the notification
That's
zone.
right, that's right.
And some of these developments. Right.
That's right.
Let me broaden our discussion to another issue which is of common concern to India and Japan right now, which is the nature of the international system and in particular the nature of the United Nations and the structure of the UN Security Council. Japan and India are partners in the quest to enlarge the Security Council and create permanent seats for the so-called G4 as a first step. Also, of course, Africa, which does not have any seats. The last time this was tried in a serious manner was in 2004, 2005, when the G4 attempt to reform the Security Council reached a certain stage and then it petered out. There seems to be a renewed push again. How do you rate the chances of the G4 pushing ahead with Security Council reform now compared to a decade ago?
Well, what I'm going to say is not what the Japanese government is saying.
We want you to be frank and realistic.
In the year 2005, we had a similar campaign, and Japan lost it. I mean, let's accept it. China had dispatched many delegations to Asia, saying that in the Japanese DNA there is still a blood of bellicosity. So how can you accept such a militaristic nation into the UN as the Permanent Council Security Council member? Unfortunately, a lot of Asian countries were sort of intimidated by this Chinese campaign, and they could not openly express their support for Japanese candidature. Now, the situation has changed since then, not very much. And, well, India is loved by many countries, but for Japan, we have a problem with our important neighbors. So my personal feeling is that we should not make Japanese people give them an over expectation.
Right.
Now, we of course need and want to be at the Security Council all the time. So de facto, permanent Security Council member by continuing to win the election.
Okay.
And which will be tantamount to a permanent Security Council member without a veto.
Right.
And I think that should be the starting point.
Let me ask you a slightly rude question based on your analysis. Would India be better off disengaging from Japan? In other words, making an independent case for a permanent seat rather than mixing its aims or its aspirations with that of Japan, given that the Japanese case seems to generate a lot more opposition than the Indian case.
Well,
if you were an Indian diplomat, what would you advise?
If there's a disarray among G4s, that will be certainly disadvantageous. So I think Japan and India need to sit down and really do the frank consultation and come up with a same strategy.
Okay.
If India insists on the older course of trying to get into the council as a permanent Security Council member with veto, well, Japan must adjust its course.
Right.
I mean, I think that's anyway what Japanese government is going to do.
Right. In a sense, this gives me an entry point to the next set of questions I wanted to ask you, because one of the reasons why the Japanese claim to a greater international role evokes opposition is because, as the Chinese have argued, but as many countries have accepted, the Japanese policy with regard to certain historical questions has been, shall we say, inconsistent. You yourself have served on a very important panel, which was set up to advise Abe-san on issues of history and making an assessment of the 20th century. The panel on the history of the 20th century and on Japan's role and world order in the 21st century. And the reason why this panel was set up in a way was because some of the statements that Abe-san made, particularly last year, on issues of history, where he suggested that he would no longer be bound by the apology that Premier Murayama had made in, I think, 1995, which was considered...
That's not true.
He made statements that were considered ambiguous. Would you say that, in a way, the current government has invited some of the opposition that we see by its ambiguous stance on history and the extent to which, at least until the recent statement of the Prime Minister, Japan was willing to make a complete break with the past and apologize for whatever acts of aggression it had committed?
Well, I know Mr. Abe well. He is not a rightist, much less a revisionist. But, well, I must admit that some of the surrounders around him are causing ultra-nationalistic comments.
Okay.
But anyway, Japan has been apologizing to Asian countries for many times, more than 10 prime ministerial statements. We paid war reparations to Asian countries, sometimes reaching 20% of our national budget. But our apologies are not accepted. Recently, we had come to a complete rapprochement with the United States. It needs to be forgiven. Germany was accepted to Europe because France forgave Germany. Now, who is France for Japan? It's not China so far, unfortunately. It's been the United States and European countries. But we must keep on bowing our head low, because what we did between 1931 and 1945 are inexcusable.
Right. But may I suggest...
invasion, and we will keep repenting what we did. But when will they meaning China and Korea accept us?
May I suggest that one of the reasons that Germany's credentials are not questioned anymore is only partly because they were dealing with a country like France, but also because if you look at German chancellors from Adenauer to Willy Brandt to Helmut Schmidt, Helmut Kohl, Angela Merkel, there's been no inconsistency in any statement they have made about historical questions. Whereas on the Japanese side, as a result or perhaps a product of right-wing politics or competitive politics, as you said, people around Abe-san, there is this impression that some Japanese politicians play to the domestic gallery. There is the whole role of the Yasukuni Shrine, for example. So because of this inconsistency, apologies made in the past, and I mentioned, I think Tomichi Murayama's statement, I think, was applauded and welcomed across Asia. But subsequently, whether it was Hashimoto-san or others who, tried to suggest, well, maybe he went too far, that this is the reason why nationalists in China are able to use this as a stick to beat Japan with. So is the fault then somewhere on the Japanese political establishment side as well?
I agree partly with your analysis. How Japan feel repentant of the acts we did should be reflected in our education.
Right.
And
in textbooks and so on, yeah.
Textbooks are right.
Okay.
but teachers usually stay away from discussing about the war because there are conflicting views within Japan itself. But as a result, kids are not taught with consistent history, consistent narratives. The abhorrence towards war is embedded in the DNA of Japanese. But we have not really faced what we did. Who caused the war, what was the reason, what was the systemic default, and so forth. So that's what we must do.
Right.
But at the same time, China and Korea must really accept what we have been saying. And there have been events where both countries found it rather useful to keep the issue alive for their political
for their own domestic
reasons.
political reasons, yeah.
But well, I'm somewhat envious of the situation in Europe, where bilateral rapprochement was brought about by a larger framework. They, as you know, they started forming ECSC and then to EEC, EC and EU. And maybe, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years from now, we'll be able to come to that stage in Asia.
Master, we have about a minute left, minute and a half. You mentioned at the start of this interview the discussions on the Japanese constitution, the security legislation. What, in your mind, is the significance of some of the new security legislation that Abe-san has pushed through the Diet? Is it that the SDF now, the Japanese self-defense forces, will have a greater freedom to operate in a purely defensive manner, or are there also offensive operations which might be undertaken now?
Well, the ban on the use of military force for purposes other than defending Japan is still embedded in the constitution, which we did not change. So that remains. But still, within the constitution, we will have much greater freedom for our SDF to engage in international operations where we are not using a military force, but will be much more effective in supporting logistical jobs and joining UN PKO, preserving security, for providing security for the residents and so forth. So you will be seeing a quite different outlook, much more proactive Japan to be in the Middle East and in Asia.
This remains, of course, a intensely debated topic in Japan, perhaps even divisive, but the laws have now been amended in a way, the legislation has been passed, and we will see now how Japanese policy evolves. Okamoto-san, thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that wraps up this episode of Indian Standard Time. Do join us again next time with another guest.